Reverend Joseph Ben David is Minister Emeritus of the Religious Society of Czech Unitarians. His mentor was Dr. Norbert Capek, the founder of the society, who, as a most dramatic spiritual leader, created the unique flower communion and built the Prague congregation into the largest Unitarian church in the world, having 3,000 members at its peak. I'd like to introduce you to Reverend Ben David. Wow.
Let me address you the way we address the Czech Unitarians in Prague. My beloved Unitarian brothers and sisters. Now what I'm going to share with you is a personal experience with my mentor, Norbert Capek. I discovered the Czech Unitarian building because there was rain and I was seeking shelter. And there I entered the sanctuary, and this small man with an expression of vitality, unmistakably full of energy, speaking. And you know what? It was not a beautiful sermon. It was a confrontation with what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. Because his life was not just a life of a regular professional minister. Capek was a unique individual. He started out as a Catholic. At the age of 18, he suddenly discovered that Catholicism, and I'm using a strong word, is a murderous religion. Now you see, mundanity, banality, this regular way of thinking of the masses was just the opposite of what Capek was confronting. See, the masses don't think, individuals do. But when there is this massification of the unspirit, it's not the spirit. It's like a mob that is ready to kill. And so, this was, if I would characterize Capek, I would say that he was a genius in terms of paradoxical logic. He saw the horror of life on one hand and the beauty of the spirit on the other. And here he was, changing from Catholicism to baptism. And there too, he discovered that there is religion that is destructive and evil, and that there is a religion that elevates people to the highest levels of being. So what did he do? After being a very successful Baptist minister, he rejected baptism, the Baptist religion, and he became a Unitarian. Well, what was the essence of it? After all, he became a martyr. He was murdered because of his position and life. He was not the only martyr. The Unitarians had lots of martyrs, beginning with Ludwig Metzger, who was beheaded, Michael Servetus, who was burned at the stake, Francis David, or David, who died miserably in prison, and Viola Linzoa, who was murdered in Alabama, this beautiful 38-year-old woman, and eventually James Reeb, who was clubbed to death. And there were more. But the one that represents a contemporary kind of worldview was really Norbert. He was a Renaissance man. He was a journalist. He was a psychologist. He was a poet. He was a writer. And when he discovered Unitarianism, it was already around the 1920s. He had to escape. In 1914, he already had to escape the Czech, the Bohemian land, because the Germans were considering a traitor, and so he came to the United States. And he was a member of this church, of your church.
We know.
It is almost like if I see him here, his statue, his persona. I remember him so well because I had personal conversations with him. See, when I discovered the Unitaria in Prague, the first thing that I did was I called him and I asked him for a kind of an expression of opinion in certain matters. And he immediately invited me to his apartment on Ovelicka Street, 24. And there he gave me 2 sermons. One was titled, "Why We Unitarians Don't Believe in Miracles," and the other was, "God or a Human Being." And it was only much later that I discovered how profound this idea of rejecting miracles is. Because revealed religion, in many ways, is a sign of pathology.
Yeah.
It is a belief in something non-existing. And more than that, that belief is translated into action. And so millions and millions, actually billions of people of all these revealed religions, where this might, this power that Capek was challenging. Now, when I became the cultural secretary of the Unitarian youth in Prague, we had the idea that what is needed is the development of a higher spiritual culture, and that it is necessary to counteract the ignorance of people by promoting not just a kind of a comfortable religious activity where people come Sunday to enjoy listening to soothing sermons, but a struggling movement for the sake of truth and justice. And you know, when you pursue truth, it is the most dangerous thing that is. Because in many instances, life is full of lies and deceit. And here was Norbert Capek confronting that. Now, he was not a reformer. He was a revolutionary. And when he wrote his first major book, which was entitled New Furrow, a narrow trench of spirituality made in the ground. In that book, he was talking about the lack of consciousness as being the biggest barrier to human progress. And so he was talking on many, many subjects in a way which included very often the word God, that we have to understand his concept of God. First, he was a pantheist, but eventually became a panentheist. What is that? Pantheism is the belief that everything is nature. And it's a very, how should I say, controversial issue. Because nature is both. It is harmonious, it is peaceful, it is beautiful. But it is also predatory, confused. And this relates to human beings. But the idea of God, in his conception, was the idea that there is a creative spark that somehow releases the creative process. And that he saw in nature too. So he was using the word God in a panentheistic sense, which meant everything is in nature, but nature is also in us. And this creative process is the great ideal and basically purpose in life. And so, when he started the Czech Unitarian Association, first he didn't call it Unitarians because the Czechs wouldn't respond to the name Unitarian. He called it Free Brotherhood. It's a sexist term. Today we call it Free Humanhood. But at that time, you see, people who were suddenly enlightened through his preachings and through his writing were joining the church, this free brotherhood. And eventually, with the help of the American Unitarian Association, he was able to build up the Czech Unitarian Association to 3,200 members in Prague, which was the biggest Unitarian church in the world. Now, what was the secret? How come he did that? We'd like to know. Well, he did it because he was doing something for people, and the people took it. And what was it? See, he was not just theologically oriented, although this was the profound basis of all his functioning. He was a psychologist. And what he was doing was helping people to overcome their self-defeating behavior, their destructive feelings, and he did it in all kinds of ways. He did it as an individual counselor. He did it in his speeches. And you know what he did for me, which saved my life? He taught me three things. He taught me relaxation, which enabled me to be open and to absorb things in their reality. Then he taught me meditation, which was not just some kind of a, Namiyor and Dekio and so on. He was turning myself into myself, and by doing that, quieting all my senses to the degree that thinking stopped, and what transcends the thinking is a perception of reality in a completely different existential manner. And so I was able to do that, and therefore I never hated anyone, including my enemies. My mother was murdered by the Nazis in a worst concentration camp, and I cannot hate Hitler. And some people cannot understand that, because in the conventional sense, jealousy is a normal thing. Hate is a normal thing. Fear is a normal thing. But it is not. And this is where Capek was teaching something that today some of us who are psychologically educated know that has to be applied. What are we talking about? We are talking about the psychology of Viktor Frankl, which is telling us that unless there is an important purpose in life, life cannot be lived in any productive way. Albert Ellis, who is telling us that unconditional acceptance is absolutely essential in order to be a free-thinking and open-minded person. Eric Fromm, who is teaching us that love, and Capek was saying that love is also the purpose of life, that love requires caring, understanding, and many other positive attributes which are necessary to actualize in one's life. And Abraham Maslow developed a whole theory how to move from lower levels to higher levels of being. And Capek wrote a very beautiful, it's a big book called To the Sunny Shore, a very positive title. And in that book, he's explaining the enormity of, and the, how should I say, specificity of human behavior, human thinking, human feeling. It's a conglomeration of all kinds of factors which are the basis for the development of authentic humanity of people. A wonderful book. I wish it were translated into English. So, if Capek would live today, some of his ideas of the time when he was still alive are just as contemporary and necessary as at that time. Take, for example, the Arab-Israeli problem. Capek was a very radical critic of the Bible. He saw the Bible again as a horrendous compilation of books of the most negative nature. But at the same time, he saw that there was a lot of positive wisdom in the Bible. He saw both, see? And I was, at that time, a very naive Zionist. I was saying, I came to him in one of my conversations, and I said, you know, the Jews have been persecuted for so many years, thousands of years. Why shouldn't they have their own state and live in peace and prosperity? And he said something very prophetic. He said to me, you know, this is a very nice idea, but there is one problem. And the problem is that the Jews believe in a national God. And you see, again, this horrendousness of the superstition. Today, because of that, because of the enmity that follows when the national Jewish God and the Allah of the Muslims is clashing. It is a question of life and death. And so Capek was very modern in terms of his thinking. Now, you know, I had a very negative experience with the Czech Unitarians, which I want to share with you, although it is not a very inspirational kind of moment in my life. When Hitler invaded Prague, see, our building was right on the shores of the river Morda. The German tanks were just coming in and we heard them like under the windows. And there was in the youth group one guy who was extremely jealous of my position as the cultural secretary. He wanted to be the cultural secretary. And we were all standing there and you know, witnessing this thing of Prague occupation. And he said suddenly, you know, Capek, which was my nickname, should not be with us. He will endanger us. Well, I was standing there and waiting what the reaction of the rest of the young people would be. But the reaction was total silence. So I removed myself from the sanctuary and came home. And when I came home, I was informed that my father, because of the aggravation, and he was a Czech patriot, died in an electric tramway on the street. So it was a horrible day. The next day, I called Capek and I visited him and told him about it. And he said, "This is what they did to you?" Wait. He went to a room in the back. And you see, I was not 18 yet. And in order to be a member of the church, you would have to be 18 years old. He came and brought a membership card and he said, "Hereby I am making you a member of the Czech Unitarian Association, and here I will put in for 6 months paid membership fee." So that made me feel a little bit better.
Wow.
But it was still an issue. And so, let me say a few words about his martyrdom. You know, he didn't have an easy life. He was an unusually vital person, vital and violent, both. He even wrote a sex book entitled Marriage, because he was doing sex education. He was very, very, you know, human. It was his forte. And so, he eventually produced a situation where he didn't have a choice but being attacked by others. There was even a time where there was a conspiracy within the church to remove him from the church. He was married 3 times, and his second wife died. He had 8 children with her, Maria. And eventually, of course, he was married to Maya, whom he met in the United States. And Maya was 17 years younger than him. He had altogether, I believe, about 12 children. So he was a sexually very active man. See? And if we see that, see, we can relate to him. But he suffered a lot. It was not easy for him to keep the activity that was necessary in order to build the church. Now, when he was arrested by the Nazis, he was a victim of the Heydrich time. Because when Heydrich was murdered by the Czech partisans, the Germans got crazy. And while he was imprisoned for listening to the British radio, it was not something where he would have gotten capital punishment. But after the murder of Heydrich, they did him in. And there are 2 versions. One version is that he was sent to Dachau and that he was eventually gassed. And the other is that he was subjected to some medical experiments. You see, he had a huge neck. He was small. It was like, you know,
like a wrestler.
Yeah, but this neck, apparently that they injected pus into his neck to see how long it will take before a person dies from an infection like that. Now this is another version. We don't know which one is true. In any event, he ended up, but his spirit was high. Some people who knew him in the concentration camp were saying that he was helping them to keep up their spirit, and that he was such a wonderful person. And this is, I want to quote this. This is what he wrote at the end. Out of the depth I call to you. Give me power today in this dark time. Let me be true, till storms have blown away from everything and everyone, from all life left alone. Alone, despairing, faith undone. My heart has turned to stone. Beside me, only you remain, my comforter and friend. Your faithfulness my heart sustains. I know this night will end. The struggle of my life and pain fades in the cosmic scheme, a glimmer in a drop of rain, lost in the battle's dream. Again, I come to pray in haste, O God, thanks be to Thee. May all who suffer find Your grace, and may I thankful be. Now these were his last words that we know of. And so, at this point, let me conclude by saying, we here in all UU churches can still have Capek as the symbol that goes beyond the persona, the symbol that shines on the way of our moving towards a saved world, a world which is now facing nuclear holocaust or worldwide dictatorship. Let us hope that we will prevent this from happening, and that the Unitarian movement, Unitarian Universalist movement, will play a decisive role in saving this world. So be it.